What happens when a famously polite British actor finally reaches the end of his patience on live television? In just 43 seconds, Lorraine Kelly's cheerful morning show unraveled into something no one watching could ever have expected. A clash so startling that viewers across the country were left frozen in disbelief, while the host scrambled to patch together the pieces of her suddenly chaotic broadcast. Late last night, exclusive footage circulated online. Footage many are already calling the most shocking on-air celebrity meltdown in daytime TV history. And what you're about to hear may forever change the way you see one of morning television's most familiar faces. Good morning, and welcome to this in-depth breakdown of the explosive moment that kept social media buzzing well past midnight. Today, we're diving into exactly what happened when Colin Firth, yes, the calm, composed, soft-spoken star of Pride and Prejudice, a man practically synonymous with restraint, hit his breaking point live on The Lorraine Show. On paper, it was meant to be an ordinary morning. Studio lights glowing, the purple sofa positioned at the perfect angle, and Lorraine Kelly greeting viewers with her trademarked warmth. Colin Firth had been invited to discuss his latest film, a straightforward promotional appearance for one of Britain's most respected actors. Nothing unusual, nothing risky, just another pleasant interview. But from the moment Colin stepped onto the set, something felt off. Those who know him describe a man who chooses his words carefully, who weighs every sentence before letting it leave his mouth, and who treats interviewers with a professionalism rarely matched in the industry. Yet today, a tension hovered over him, subtle but unmistakable. Even the small studio audience seemed to sense it. Lorraine began in her usual upbeat tone, her lilting accent filling the room with practiced warmth. "Right then, we're absolutely delighted to have the wonderful Colin Firth with us this morning," she announced, leaning forward with the confident posture of a host who believes she knows exactly where the conversation will go. "Now, Colin, darling, I have to ask you about something that's been all over the papers this week." That's when the first warning sign flickered. Colin's expression shifted just a hair. Not enough to alarm an untrained eye, but enough for attentive viewers to notice the slightest tightening of his jaw. He had clearly come prepared to talk about his film, his craft, his professional journey. Instead, Lorraine was steering the ship into tabloid waters. "The thing is," Lorraine continued, adopting that familiar gossipy cadence daytime presenters hone over the years, "everyone's been talking about your personal life lately, and I think our viewers deserve to know the truth." Colin straightened, maintaining that poised actor's stillness that has carried him through countless interviews. "I'd really prefer to focus on the film today, Lorraine. That's what we agreed to discuss." His voice was calm, measured, controlled, but underneath it lingered something else, a gentle but unmistakable warning, a plea to reroute the conversation before the turbulence hit. But Lorraine either didn't notice or chose not to. "Oh, come on now," she laughed, waving a dismissive hand. "You can't expect to come on television and not talk about the elephant in the room. Our audience is smart, Colin. They read the papers. They know what's going on." And in that moment, something shifted so sharply that even viewers at home felt it. The polite facade cracked. The atmosphere changed. What happened next would ignite the internet, dominate morning headlines, and leave millions asking the same question. What pushed one of Britain's most composed actors to lose control on live television? The camera didn't miss a single detail of Colin's expression in that pivotal moment. His brow tightened just enough to betray the strain beneath the surface, and his hands settled more firmly on his knees as though grounding himself against a storm he had not expected to face. He looked like a man fighting, calmly, desperately, to keep his composure. "What elephant would that be, Lorraine?" he asked, his voice quiet but edged with caution. And that was the moment everything began to unravel. Lorraine leaned back with the satisfied air of a host who believed she had just scored a meaningful journalistic victory. Well, the separation rumors, of course. The stories about you and Livia. I mean, after 20 years of marriage, surely you can give us something. The silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat or two, but for everyone watching, it stretched endlessly. Colin Firth, Mr. Darcy himself, the man who had spent decades charming audiences with subtlety and grace, sat utterly still, processing what had just been tossed into his lap. He had been ambushed, plain and simple. "I see," he said finally. Two small words, but the tone behind them landed like a tidal wave. So this was never about the film at all. For the first time, Lorraine's polished smile wavered, though only for a flicker of a second. She recovered quickly, pressing on with forced cheeriness. "Now don't be like that. We're all friends here. I'm just asking what everyone else is thinking." "Friends?" Colin repeated, and this time his voice carried a sting sharp enough to slice through the studio's bright artificial atmosphere. The audience collectively straightened, sensing the shift. "Friends?" Colin repeated, and this time his voice carried a sting sharp enough to slice through the studio's bright artificial atmosphere. The audience collectively straightened, sensing the shift. "What elephant would that be, Lorraine?" he asked, his voice quiet but edged with caution. And that was the moment everything began to unravel. Lorraine leaned back with the satisfied air of a host who believed she had just scored a meaningful journalistic victory. "Well, the separation rumors, of course. The stories about you and Livia. I mean, after 20 years of marriage, surely you can give us something." The silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat or two, but for everyone watching, it stretched endlessly. Colin Firth, Mr. Darcy himself, the man who had spent decades charming audiences with subtlety and grace, sat utterly still, processing what had just been tossed into his lap. He had been ambushed, plain and simple. "I see," he said finally. Two small words, but the tone behind them landed like a tidal wave. So this was never about the film at all. For the first time, Lorraine's polished smile wavered, though only for a flicker of a second. She recovered quickly, pressing on with forced cheeriness. "Now don't be like that. We're all friends here. I'm just asking what everyone else is thinking." "Friends?" Colin repeated, and this time his voice carried a sting sharp enough to slice through the studio's bright artificial atmosphere. The audience collectively straightened, sensing the shift. "Friends?" Colin repeated, and this time his voice carried a sting sharp enough to slice through the studio's bright artificial atmosphere. The audience collectively straightened, sensing the shift. "Is that what friends do, Lorraine? Invite someone onto their show under false pretenses, then ambush them with personal questions they've specifically asked not to discuss?" The atmosphere changed instantly, thickened, tightened, darkened. What had begun as harmless morning chatter was spiraling rapidly into something far more uncomfortable. Lorraine shifted in her seat, her professional smile still in place, though now it seemed strained around the edges. "Oh, now you're being dramatic," she insisted, letting out a laugh that rang hollow even through the television speakers. Colin's reply was quiet, steady, and delivered with the kind of precision that only a seasoned actor could muster. "Being a public figure doesn't mean I've forfeited my right to privacy about my family, and it certainly doesn't mean I've agreed to have my personal life dissected for entertainment." The studio audience fell deathly silent. The tension became almost tangible, like static in the air before a storm breaks. This was not the cozy, easygoing content they had expected to witness on a weekday morning. But Lorraine, rather than easing off, seemed determined to dig her heels in. Perhaps she believed she could charm her way out of the escalating conflict. Perhaps she underestimated the resolve of the man sitting across from her. "Look, I understand you want to protect your privacy," she said, leaning forward again, wearing what she hoped resembled sympathy. But let's be honest here. You've been photographed, there are sources, the story's already out there. I'm giving you a chance to set the record straight." Colin let out a short, humorless laugh, one that held none of his usual warmth. "You're giving me a chance? How generous of you, Lorraine. And what exactly am I supposed to be grateful for? The opportunity to have my marriage examined like a soap opera plotline?" "That's not what I'm doing," she protested immediately, but her voice had shifted, thin now, defensive, in a way viewers could clearly hear. And just like that, the polished facade of breakfast television had cracked wide open, revealing the raw, unfiltered conflict beneath.
"I'm simply asking you to address the rumors." "No." Colin's voice cut through the air with a clarity that left no room for misunderstanding. "What you're doing is exploiting gossip for ratings. What you're doing is pretending your curiosity serves the public interest. What you're doing is exactly the kind of tabloid behavior that makes actors hesitant to sit for interviews in the first place." The words hung between them like a gauntlet thrown at her feet. Lorraine's face shifted rapidly, surprise flashing into irritation, irritation collapsing into something dangerously close to panic. She tried to regain control, but her voice no longer carried the breezy confidence of earlier. "I think you're overreacting," she said, though the tremor beneath the sentence betrayed her. "This is morning television, Colin. People expect a bit of fun, a bit of gossip. It's not meant to be the BBC News." Colin rose from the purple sofa with a slow, deliberate movement that felt like the axis of the entire room shifted with him. The studio energy tightened, thick and electric. "Fun," he repeated softly. "Is that what you call it when you pry into someone's marriage without their consent? When you take personal pain and turn it into entertainment for your viewers?" "Now hold on just a minute," Lorraine said quickly, her voice lifting as she sensed the moment slipping away from her. "You knew what kind of show this was when you agreed to come on. Don't act like you're some sort of victim here." The word struck him like an open-handed slap. "Victim," Colin whispered, and the quiet intensity of it carried more force than a shouted accusation. His composure, strained and fraying since the first inappropriate question, finally began to give way. "You invite me onto your show under the pretense of discussing my work. Then you blindside me with questions about my personal life. And when I object, you tell me I'm overreacting, that I somehow asked for this treatment?" Lorraine's professional mask, practiced over decades of live broadcasting, was crumbling at the edges. She lifted her hand slightly, almost pleading. "Colin, please sit down. Let's just calm down and have a proper conversation." A proper conversation. His voice sharpened, rising with a heat that filled the studio. "Is that what you call this? You have spent the entire interview trying to extract personal information I've explicitly said I don't want to discuss. And now you want me to sit here and behave because it's more convenient for you?" The camera operator faltered, lens woggling as he switched between close-ups of Colin's flushed, impassioned expression and wider shots capturing the tense tableau between host and guest. In the background, producers hovered behind the glass, gesturing frantically. Cut to commercial, change the subject, fade to something, anything. The chaos behind the scenes mirrored the chaos unfolding on set. "I'm just doing my job," Lorraine insisted, but the words had lost their authority. They sounded small, defensive, cornered, almost brittle. Colin turned fully to her, and for a long moment the entire studio seemed to hinge on the intensity in his eyes. "Your job," he repeated, "your job is to interview people, not interrogate them. Your job is to entertain, not exploit. Your job, Lorraine, is supposed to include some basic level of human decency and respect." His voice reverberated through the studio, filling every inch of the space with a weight no one could ignore. A hush fell over the audience. Not a murmur, not a cough, not even a shuffle of feet. The silence was total, the kind of silence that comes when something real, raw, unfiltered breaks through the glossy veneer of morning television. Colin Firth stood there breathing hard, the carefully crafted image of the refined British gentleman stripped away. What remained was a man pushed too far, exposed and furious, standing in the center of a studio that no longer felt like a safe space, but a battlefield he never intended to step onto.
And do you know what the worst part is, Lorraine? Colin continued, his voice slicing through the stunned stillness of the studio like a sharpened blade. The worst part is that you sit there with that practiced smile, pretending to care about me as a human being, when the only thing you truly care about is whether I'll give you something juicy enough to trend on social media. Lorraine's mouth opened, then closed again. She tried once more, but still nothing came out. For perhaps the first time in her long, decorated broadcasting career, she looked genuinely, utterly speechless. But Colin wasn't finished. The dam had burst. Years of irritation, frustration, and quiet resentment toward invasive media coverage were finally spilling out in full force. "Do you have any idea," he said, stepping closer, "what it's like to have every corner of your private life treated as public property? Do you understand what it does to a family, my family, when our most painful, intimate moments become fodder from morning television?" Lorraine's mouth opened, then closed again. She tried once more, but still nothing came out. For perhaps the first time in her long, decorated broadcasting career, she looked genuinely, utterly speechless. But Colin wasn't finished. The dam had burst. Years of irritation, frustration, and quiet resentment toward invasive media coverage were finally spilling out in full force. "Do you have any idea," he said, stepping closer, "what it's like to have every corner of your private life treated as public property? Do you understand what it does to a family, my family, when our most painful, intimate moments become fodder from morning television?" Lorraine finally managed, her voice trembling as she attempted to gather the broken pieces of control. "This is live television. There are millions of people watching." "Oh, I know exactly where I am. I'm sitting across from someone who believes having a television platform gives her the right to pry into personal lives without consequence. I'm in a studio where basic human decency apparently doesn't matter as long as the cameras are rolling." The accusation drifted through the room like smoke, heavy, toxic, impossible to ignore. Lorraine's complexion had drained to a sickly pale hue. For the first time since the confrontation escalated, she looked genuinely shaken. "That's not fair," she whispered. "Fair?" Colin's laugh was short, sharp, bitter. "You want to talk about what's fair? Is it fair that I came here in good faith to discuss my work, only to be ambushed with questions about my marriage? Is it fair that you spent this entire interview digging for personal information that could hurt the people I love most in the world?" Lorraine sat up straighter, and for a brief moment it seemed she might fight back. The spark of her usual professional confidence flickered in her eyes. "I'm a journalist, Colin," she said stiffly. "I ask the questions people want answered." "No." Colin pointed directly at her, each word delivered with cold precision. "You're not a journalist. Journalists have ethics. Journalists respect their subjects. Journalists don't ambush people on live television and then hide behind their profession when they get called out." The words struck Lorraine almost like a slap. Her polished presenter persona, a persona she had built, refined, and relied on for decades, crumbled visibly. What replaced it was raw, defensive, and unguarded. "How dare you?" she sputtered. "I've been doing this job for decades. I've interviewed everyone from prime ministers to Hollywood's biggest names. I don't need some actor telling me how to do my job." Colin's expression shifted. The fiery anger softened, replaced by something quieter and far more devastating: pity. "And in all those decades, Lorraine,
Have you ever stopped to consider the cost? Have you ever thought about the damage you might be doing to real people's lives for the sake of entertainment? Have you ever, just once, paused to think about the harm behind the headlines you chase? The question landed with unflinching precision. Lorraine's face twisted through a rapid progression of emotions: anger, confusion, defensiveness, and then, finally, something that looked alarmingly like shame. She began, voice unsteady, but Colin lifted a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. In that small, quiet gesture, he reclaimed the power she had tried so hard to take.
Do you know what the truly tragic part is? Colin continued, his voice no longer sharp with anger, but softened into something far more devastating: disappointment. The studio, which only minutes earlier hummed with the usual energy of a morning talk show, had fallen into an unnatural stillness. You could have had a perfectly good interview today. We could have discussed the craft of acting, the new film, the years of work that went into it. We could have talked about the industry, the changes it's facing, the challenges young actors will inherit. Your viewers could have gotten something meaningful, something real. He shook his head slowly. But instead, you chose to turn this into a circus. Lorraine swallowed hard, fighting to regain her footing. The audience wants to know about your personal life, Colin, she insisted, her voice wavering. That's just the reality of celebrity culture. No, Lorraine, he replied, his tone firm but heartbreakingly calm. You want to know about my personal life. You've convinced yourself that your curiosity somehow represents public interest, but it doesn't. It's voyeurism dressed up as journalism. A thick, heavy silence followed. Even the crew, people trained to keep moving no matter what happened on set, had frozen. The cameras remained pointed, the lights still bright, but no one dared to breathe too loudly. Colin looked around the studio, his gaze sweeping over the audience members who had come expecting light-hearted banter and cheerful conversation. Instead, they had been pulled into something raw, a public confrontation about dignity, respect, and the corrosive nature of invasive entertainment. Do you know what the saddest part of all this is? He said at last. Somewhere out there, young actors are watching this moment. They're watching how you treat me, not as a guest, not as a human being, but as a spectacle. And they're learning that this is what they have to expect, that their personal lives will be treated like commodities, that respect is optional as long as the ratings are good. He turned back to Lorraine. Her composure had begun to crumble. The confident host who had interviewed thousands of guests now looked small beneath the weight of his words. Is that the legacy you want, Lorraine? Is that what you want to be remembered for? I'm just trying to do my job, she whispered, barely audible. Colin reached for his jacket, lifting it carefully from the back of the sofa. Every movement was deliberate, controlled, as though he refused to let the chaos of the moment pull him off balance. Then maybe it's time to ask yourself whether this job is worth compromising your humanity. He turned toward the studio exit, and for a moment it seemed as though the interview would end with his silent departure. But at the doorway, he paused and looked back one last time. What he said next carried the weight of years of being scrutinized, misrepresented, and picked apart for entertainment. You had a chance today to show your viewers that celebrities are human beings deserving of respect and dignity. Instead, you chose to prove that morning television cares more about gossip than human decency. I hope it was worth it. Then he walked out. The soft click of the studio doors closing echoed louder than any applause or outburst could. Lorraine Kelly sat alone on her signature purple sofa, surrounded by cameras, crew members, and a stunned audience who had just witnessed something unprecedented. The cheerful set, usually so warm and familiar, suddenly felt cold and cavernous. For long seconds, no one moved. The woman known for her bright smile and effortless charm stared at the empty space where Colin had been. When she finally turned back to the camera, the mask was gone. No polished presenter remained, only a shaken woman with nowhere to hide. "Well, I suppose we should take a quick break." But everyone watching knew that this wasn't the kind of break a television show could fix. Some moments change things permanently. Some fractures never mend. What had just unfolded would go down as one of the most shocking walkouts in morning television history, one that would force uncomfortable conversations about media ethics, celebrity culture, and the cost of treating human beings like entertainment.